You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 106 of Arsenal Pass. This week we're going to be breaking down Hayden's Briar deck that he would have played at the Pro Tour if he was able to attend. Hayden prepped for this Pro Tour like he was going to be competing, so this is sort of in the mind of a pro, how they would prepare, the deck he came up with, why he came up with it, looking at the metagame, looking at, of course, the main deck, why we chose the cards we chose, and why we omitted some cards, specifically Arcane Barrier in this list, and then talking about the sideboard and, of course, game plans, and all that good stuff. Anyway, Hayden, before that, how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
Good week in Flesh and Blood. PT is this coming weekend, so I'm going to be glued to my screen watching one Brendan Patrick plus friends casting. Got a few extra drafts in, got a few games of CC, and just sort of, I kind of put the deck down last week, kind of just been changing a few cards. I'll talk about it once we get into the pod. There's about 90 cards that I could see fitting into this deck. Briar is the deck I would have played at the PT. It's a hero that has access to a lot of different cards, so it's been sort of the last bits of testing has been really just what cards you play and why as the meta starts to evolve and develop. And I know, Brennan, by the time this pod goes out, you've already done this, but you're hosting a Twitter space shortly after this pod about the meta with Tarek Patel. And I think I'm interested to hear, because I think the meta has really been, at least in testing groups, it's probably been fairly, I don't want to say stale, but fairly solved to a degree for a while. But I think in the public eye, it's been evolving a lot over the past 2 weeks. And for a lot of people, it would have been still in testing. But I think certain groups would have had their understanding of what this meta is going to look like. So it's going to be really interesting. That's what I say when sort of deciding last few cards, which we'll talk about. And then, I played a Blitz skirmish on the weekend, which was a lot of fun. I got out to a limited draft and sealed skirmish a couple of weeks ago in week 1 when I was back home in New Zealand. This final week, I did bring out the Ice Wizard, brought out Icelander for the final time before Living Legends. We'll see, it's about a Living Legend. With the conclusion of the skirmish season, same as Alton by the looks of it, managed to snag a little Cold Foil Azalea by winning the event, Brendan. So had a lot of fun. Was a cool deck I played. Not too dissimilar. I know Arcane, if you've been following Blitz at all this season, the Arcane Icelander has been the deck that everyone's been sort of touting as the best deck in the format. I don't disagree. Stormstriders is broken, as Brendan very well knows, and would be upset if it got taken away from him again. But I did play some attack actions in my deck, and I also played, the card I played that did so much work for me was definitely This Round's on Me. So, yeah. Anyway, it was fun. I had a lot of fun.
That's a card that we were messing around with in the Blitz deck for Worlds. A lot of those sort of cantripping cards. So by the time this has come out, I've done 2 Twitter spaces with Mr. Tarek Patel. We're doing sort of a full comprehensive breakdown of the meta. So literally top to bottom, all the decks, what we think is going to show up, and then diving into the actual lists and the game plans. If you don't know anything, if you didn't know anything, it's weird talking about this in the past tense. If you didn't know anything about what the Pro Tour might look like, I hope that after listening to this one Twitter space, which is recorded, it's probably on my profile or something, you'll be up to speed. That's really the goal. So I think it'll be on the longer side. And then, of course, a couple days after that, we did the limited version. The same thing, same goal. Just prepping for the Pro Tour and bringing experts in their fields on stage. So, maybe in your play group, you've got the Dramai Stan who's like, this deck is so good. And you're like, hey, dude, it loses every single event, but he really believes that. Well, this is what those Twitter spaces are for, bringing those people on board so they can come make their case about why they keep losing so much. Anyway, Hayden, into the news.
Imagine if Jorma won the PT. Would be huge. Yeah, I also just want to say, if you're looking for that Blitz Icelander deck, not that's going to be super relevant now because it's about to Living Legend, but there is another couple of weeks before the announcement. So if you were playing any armories or anything, you can find the deck list down in the description of the video. But yeah, Brennan, news time. I think you're going to lead the news this week. You've got something to tell us about. PT's coming up this weekend.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's. I've been holding this news back for a long time. It's actually a Pro Tour this weekend. I will be casting alongside Tan and Flake, Brian Gottlieb, and DM Armada. In Baltimore, Pro Tour Baltimore. It's a big event. I'm very excited for it, and I know that they've Legend Story Studios has specifically stepped up the coverage. For anybody that isn't aware, this viewing experience should be different than Worlds, particularly because we're actually working through a different company now. We were working through CFB and their production crew before, and now this will be through Star City Games. So I, as a cast, I'm really excited to see how that pans out. And of course, always excited for the Pro Tour, and just always grateful to be able to go to these events and meet people, hang out, and basically work doing the thing I love. So it's a great opportunity. Hayden, what else do you have for us in the news?
Well, I was just going to ask you if, like myself, people are not going to be at Baltimore but want to watch the coverage this weekend. Where do we go to find that?
That is on the Star City Games Twitch. That is where it will be.
Yep. I'll be there. I'll be in the chat.
Just flaming is like, how could he think that? No, it gets pretty crazy in there.
Who is this Brendan Patrick guy? Get him off the mics. No. Get him off the mics. Skirmish Season 6 is wrapped up. We've almost certainly said goodbye to Ultimate Icelander in the Blitz format. Good riddance. I mean, honestly, my kind of takeaway from playing Skirmish over the weekend was that I'm excited to see the back of particularly Icelander, but I think even Ultimate as well. It's really going to change this format, I think. I'm really interested to see, is Kano now just going to be the best deck? Storm Striders is just so insane to me. I almost played Kano this past weekend, but the Icelander matchup was just, really, really bad. So just decided to play Icelander. Wanted to play a Wizard. I think Ira comes back into the fold as well, which is really cool. So, Skirmish Season 6 wrapped up. There was also limited events as well. People prepping, having opportunities to play draft, ready for Road to Nationals, which is cool. What else? So there's some great articles over on fabtcg.com as well that I wanted to highlight. Heading into Pro Tour Baltimore weekend, there's some interviews with previous winners. There's if you are planning to go to Baltimore and you don't really know too much about side events and stuff, there's a massive piece about side events on there and what to expect. Plus, there is a full schedule up on, as me and Brendan just found out, on fabprotour.com. You can also check that website out. It has the full schedule available to you.
Yeah, the information is not on fabtcg.com. It is actually on fabprotour.com, which is looks like it is like a Star City Games landing page. Speaking of content they've been putting out, they also put out the developers put up a draft video on YouTube, which I watched as well. I mean, I feel like Legend Story Studios goes through these like sprints of doing content. Like they come up with an idea for like some content and they get the creators together and like, maybe in like this month, some random month or 2 months, we start to have like a bunch of content from them. Well, that's happening right now in the lead up to the Pro Tour. So there's a bunch of good stuff up on the Fab YouTube channel. And I think the best one to watch actually in preparation for the Pro Tour is of course the draft, sort of the draft breakdown from the developers, the people that created the set. But I would have to recommend above that, of course, a little podcast called Limited Time Only with one of the best draft players in the world.
Yeah, number 5 apparently for now. I'm sure that'll change after the PT. Speaking of Limited Time Only, we do have the last 2 weeks we've had some amazing guests do heroes or classes rather. We've done Ranger, we've done Assassin. Ninja will be coming up. No Limited Time Only this week at the Pro Tour. Instead, actually, what we have is class constructed gameplay heading into the Pro Tour. I grabbed local friend Nick Butcher, current Australian national champion, to play some in-person games with me. Brendan, I think you're going to like this setup. I hope. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the feedback on this in-person setup we have. We've got a few different dual cameras going on. There's a few different sort of angles and things like that to see the gameplay unfold. So we have a couple of by the time this pod's gone up, I think both of, if not definitely the first gameplay, which is Briar versus Dromai, is up. For all you Dromai stands out there and playing my Briar deck that we're going to talk about today, is up there. And then the second game as well, which features Azalea, should probably be up as well. So you can go check those out. As I say, no Limited Time Only this week. But if you are looking for draft content up on Patreon, though, I do have an additional draft video like we did a couple of weeks ago on Limited Time Only. It's a full draft viewer, so to speak, over the shoulder view of me drafting and me talking through the draft itself. In this one, I want to say, what did I draft? I'm pretty sure I drafted Riptide in this one. I can't quite remember what's gone up.
Yeah,
but
you watched like one of the best decks go past you if it was the same thing I watched.
Oh, no, so that was wait, which one's this?
This is one, I don't know. You sent me a video and it was you doing a draft and you're like, can I get some feedback on this? And I was like, I gave you feedback, but particularly in that draft, you watched like the best, I think it was like the best Ninja deck ever go right past you. Or you were drafting Ninja and it was the best Azalea deck that went past you. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's my Ninja draft and a really strong Azalea deck goes past, which is the one that's up on up on our YouTube channel from episode 3.5, limited time only. But yeah, here's a fresh new draft that I just did over the weekend. So enjoy. Anyway, that's all I've got to say.
Yeah, I just want to also. It's so funny, Hayden, because I don't think you really you really know this, but just to take people behind the curtain, like in preparation for the Pro Tour Baltimore, it's pretty crazy how much of a resource limited time only has been to me. I honestly didn't play too much drafts, but like I feel like if you just listen to the right podcasts from the right players, like, I don't know, that's like all you really need to do. I feel like I understand the format better than if I drafted it 100 times just at my locals, to be honest. And I've just been consuming content. I've been doing the same thing sort of for decks that I don't usually play. So, I gotta know what the hell Jeremiah is. So I go back and read Scott's little write-up from Irish Jeremiah and also watch some videos from some Jeremiah specialists. Won't be hitting up the Bolton videos this time, but, maybe eventually. Prove me wrong. We'll see one in top 8. But yeah, really such a good resource. If you want to know sort of what's going on at the Pro Tour, you want to understand what you're seeing on camera better, definitely check those the limited time only out.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. It's very kind words, Brendan.
Well, you give me an avenue to be lazy, so I'm like, hell yeah, keep doing this. All right, Hayden. Speaking of being lazy, let's throw some burgers on that Barbie and cook up that command cookout. What do we have this week?
Yeah, we got a great question. Excuse me.
Excuse you.
We have a great question
from
from YouTube, actually, this time, which comes from Wampa Fruit from last week's podcast, actually, which I thought was a pretty particularly good potential of what might happen in the next few weeks. Question for the pod. Wampa Fruit says, once Ultim rotates out / Living Legends, would you prefer to see another Elemental Guardian with both Ice and Earth, or 2 Elemental Guardians, one with Ice and one with Earth, separately? It seems as though a large part of Ultim's dominance comes from how flexible he is and how wide his pool of cards is. Targeting Elemental Guardian's card pool might help us with this.
Yeah, I wonder if this is like does this sort of point or hint towards like a inherent issue with talent design in the first place, do you think, where we're running into the position where Oldhim is so powerful because it just I when I think about talent design and maybe talent design not being, not executing in the way that maybe they had the original vision for, I look at the disparity between something like Oldhim and Bravo, where I see Oldhim just as, it's a better Guardian. I'm sorry. But the access to cards that Oldhim has versus Bravo, obviously Crown of Seas helps a lot. It just feels like Bravo is kind of falling behind, and we might need to see, like what we saw with Star Wars, see some sort of treatment on top of it so it gets a bit more powerful. So I wanted to preface Wampa Fruit's question with that, Hayden, and ask you if you think this is like sort of a systematic issue that happens because of the way talents work in Flesh and Blood.
Well, like you say, Bravo got the treatment and was really, really balanced as well. So I don't really No, I mean, yes, I think it is. And I think it's it isn't. I can say with 100% certainty, it's no coincidence that LSS decided to move away from talents for the set, whether that's for the reason you're asking or whether it's for just taking a reset and bringing Flesh and Blood back to a slightly less of a base power level from a hero standpoint. Card standpoint, obviously, we know we've had a lot of powerful cards printed this set. Codex, Premeditate, etc. But yeah, I think that is a big part of it, is that the talents are, and they're inherently hard to balance. They extend card pools, they make them wider, they give these heroes avenues to play in different ways. And I don't know if it's necessarily true that they're not playing the way that they anticipated. I think they've just gotten to a point of maybe not quite what LSS envisioned, and James White probably Flesh and Blood to play like. Necessarily. I don't think it's too much of a deviation, but I think this decision to move away from a talented set with outsiders makes a lot of sense for kind of where the game stands. And I guess when it comes to what Elemental Guardians look like, I really hope that we just kind of take a little bit of a break from Elemental Guardian. But I could see just, it's weird because Tales of Aria obviously brings 3 elements together, and each hero has a slice of that, right, with 2. So if you walk away from that, can you support heroes with 1 element, for instance? I think probably, and I think it's probably a pretty cool way to do it,
As a game designer, if you were looking at the current situation with, Oldhim and Bravo, like outside of specialization cards, how would I make Bravo more powerful, or maybe flesh out the hero a little bit more without inherently feeding Oldhim as well? Is it even possible, or are you sort of locked in to that design?
Yeah, well, I guess Ultim Living Legend opens up that avenue, right? But we've already seen that happen. Like, we've seen Bravo get better because of cards printed, which have also helped Ultim. Macho Grande is a fantastic card for Bravo, right? But it's also a fantastic card for Ultim on the flip side of it. So, these cards that are inherently just good Guardian cards, they're going to benefit both a non-talented and a talented Guardian, and that is part of the design piece that needs to be balanced. So, and that is, outside of cards like specializations, it's really, really hard for the game designers to do that, because how do you lock something to be Bravo but not Ultim, for instance? Like, Ultim can always go, well, I'll just build Bravo, but as Ultim. So it is difficult.
I think I would have thought that when you looked at, like, let's say with the situation with Bravo and Ultim, that when you were creating Ultim, you may have put a worse hero power in Ultim, made the hero inherently less powerful but have access to more cards. Seems like in the case of Ultim versus Bravo, Ultim had the almost objectively better hero power and had access to more cards. Do you think that the balance would potentially be this, a bit more at parity if Ultim had a somewhat worse hero ability?
I mean, maybe the hero ability is really, really good, but so is a card like Oakenold, Pulse. So is access to play all of these Guardian blues and reds, plus also, the use of some good elemental cards as well. And so if it was ice only, for instance, and only had the ice side of the ability, that's still pretty powerful, right? Like, there's still a lot of things that could be used there. So the other thing you could look at, right, I guess is, to this question, I think that would still limit it to a degree. It takes away the avenue of saying, okay, well, say the next elemental guardian is an ice only guardian, then you do take away that earth kind of element. All of a sudden it's like, well, they don't have to worry about Channelmount Heroic being a problem for that guardian potentially. They don't have to worry about, certain, I guess, earth cards, or they can't play Pulse, for instance. So there is a lot of different things they can consider if they just make it one element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, talents to me in terms of like longevity and scalability in Flesh and Blood are fascinating, and I'm just really interested to see. We're a couple of years in, or maybe 3 years into this point, but I want to look, another 5 years. What has that design sort of aged into?
Yeah, we're going to get a new talented set, right? Dust to Dawn looks, all things pointing to being talented, right? It looks like a Shadow and Light set. So I'm excited to see how they revisit talents and how they because I think, and we've talked about this a lot on the pod, Monarch, Tales of Aria, a really big bump in power, and they returned with Dynasty Outsiders. Even Uprising was sort of, I think Uprising is a good, well, maybe not. I take it back. I was about to say Uprising is a good indication of how to maybe use the talents, but look at Icelander. I'm not so sure. So I just take it all back.
Let's see what they do with Fi. I mean, you say look at Icelander, but look at Fi.
That's a better example.
Fi has seen, Fi initially was ridiculous. And it still is a very powerful hero, but talents are...
Dromai maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe Dromai is the better example then.
Yeah, maybe Dromai. Dromai is a better example, I think, for sure. And, we got Dromai by trading off, what was Spectra and the only other illusionist, which was
goodness.
Ridiculous. Anyway. Thanks for the question, Wamperfruit. I hope we answered that question. Hayden, do you think we answered it completely? I do think that, as Ultim rotates out, they probably will revisit as something specifically ice or earth, but I feel like they would have to come out in the same set. One of the things, sorry, I'm going to harp on about this, but one of the things about talent as well is once something Living Legends, it kind of feels like at this point, they're pegged into redesigning another hero under the same talent, or there's just a lot of dead cards in the game, right? And I think that's like if you're a Shadow Runeblade player or a Light Illusionist player, you sort of feel right now. And, if we extend that to both, earth and ice cards, that would be fitting into this Oldhim deck, it just kind of compounds the issue.
I think it's okay to have some of those cards, a section of a card pool that isn't playable for, say, 6 to 12 months as a stretch, for instance, in Classic Constructed. But I think once you get to both formats, like let's say Prism LL'd in both formats, Blitz and CC, I think that's a real feels bad because players can own these cards and can't play them in any particular format. I think that's an issue. But I think what would be even worse is not being able to play the class. And at the moment, LSS, I think, are mostly committed to that, to making sure, hey, you're an Illusions player. There's going to be an Illusions available. You're a Guardian player. You're a Runeblade player. Those will be available to you in some way, shape, or form. Talents, that's another, I think, piece of the puzzle. And I think that's why we haven't seen, talented cards printed in these supplemental sets. And they've stayed true to the classes because that's what they're committed to supporting and growing the card pool for and growing the game for. So I think just on this last point of the question, I think I would prefer personally to see them dabble around with solo elements, with single elements for a potential Elemental Guardian down the road. But also, you know what, let's take a break from Elemental Guardian for a good 12 months or so.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I wonder if they could add an additional deck building constraint onto Elemental or Talented Heroes because they have access to such a larger card pool. But maybe that would just be too nuanced and confusing for people. Anyway, thanks for the question, Wampa Fruit. If you want your question read out on next week's pod, shoot us a comment on YouTube and we'll get it queued up. On to the main topic, Hayden. Let's start off by talking, before we dive into your Briar deck, let's talk about the meta at the PT. Before I go into it, because I think I've been monologuing about this for the past 3 weeks on Arsenal Pass, because you're the person bringing the deck. You chose to bring Briar. Talk to me about what meta you specifically thought was going to show up and what decks you were really targeting when you picked this.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the final week, so the meta is really, you can never predict the meta, but you can always have a pretty good estimation, especially if you feel like you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. You're testing, you're iterating, you're finding out what other groups and players are probably finding out as well. And I think, Brendan, we found this out for PT1. We basically had the metagame nailed for PT1, I think, within sort of like 5 or 10% of what we thought was going to show up. PT2, very similar as well. Worlds, I think we're pretty close. Like, we're always able to try and understand what these metagames are, and it's such an important point of deciding what deck to play, is understanding what you will play, unless you've just broken the format and you've just got this deck that just doesn't really care, which has just not really happened, to be honest. We haven't really seen it yet. So I guess what the meta is going to look like, from my estimation, is that Ultim is the defining deck of this meta. Whether it's going to be the most played deck, I think it will be the most played deck, but it's either way, it's the defining deck because it's defining what you can and cannot play, I think. It's similar to what Prism has done in other formats. But Ultim is also just has great spread. So you have to understand, okay, what am I doing into Ultim? What are my plans? And I'm going to play this deck at some point in the event. I'm going to have to play against it. And I'm going to have to beat it if I want to win or top 8 a Pro Tour. So, most likely split format, but so I think Ultim is the deck. I think it's going to be first or second most played. My understanding is I think it will be the most played deck in the format. I think a lot of people who have tried things are going to come back to Ultim. Maybe they even tried Bravo for a bit, realized, as Brennan says, Ultim probably just better Guardian, especially in this format. They've looked at ways to beat Ultim. They've looked at decks to target Ranger, which we'll talk about in a second. I think a lot of them will come back to Ultim as the deck and come up with plans for Ranger, which we're about to talk about, and kind of a spread of just having a good matchups, just feeling confident in a deck that just has a good spread. So I think we're going to see Ultim as the defining deck, but also probably the most played deck. And then Lexi. Lexi is has, in testing been really, really strong. Obviously, a lot of cards printed with Outsiders that give it this massive bump, just like we've seen with Azalea in some previous events. But while some of the focus was on Azalea, we talked a lot about it as well with Azalea in sort of the Brawl and Battle Hard and Richmond. Lexi is the deck that has been in testing groups. People have been, it's the talented Ranger. People have been trying to work out what this looks like. People have been refining and building their Lexi decks. And I think a lot of groups and teams and individuals, because of the power level of Lexi, is just this really strong aggressive deck that actually also has some inbuilt disruption, are going to land on this deck. And the kind of consensus, I think, for a lot of groups is that naturally it has a good matchup into Ultim. It has and I think that's why people are going to land on Lexi. Now, I think Ultims are going to understand this and they're going to combat it. And I think people are still going to see Ultim as the most played deck, but I think Lexi is going to be not far behind. Those are going to be the top 2 played decks, Brendan.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, particularly when you talk about Lexi as being maybe the second most played deck in the role, it feels specifically as a sort of more linear aggro deck that does have a decent, if not good matchup into Oldhim. I think it's, probably it's sort of around that 50-ish range. Players will disagree on who's favored and who's not. I think that Briar fills the same role, to be honest. I think that if your Briar can have a better matchup into Oldhim than Lexi potentially. So I'm really interested to hear kind of why we land on Briar. But before that, let's talk about some other decks that are going to show up. Yeah. Obviously Azalea. So, in the context of a Briar pick, Azalea is a problem, which we'll dive into. And there has been a lot of card choices in this specific deck, keeping that in mind. But Azalea is going to show up. I mean, it had great performances at the 2 prior tournaments to Pro Tour Baltimore, which, it's NA only. It's a small sample size, but you got to take it into consideration. Brody's been absolutely, crushing with that deck. And then finally, I think the last deck to really keep on your radar is Dromai. Although this is an international event and there's players all from around the world traveling, it is a North American based event. And I think that the North American sort of metadata is weighted a bit more when you do have those events, because there's going to be more of them, more of those players at the events. And I think that if you look at past results, there's a lot of Dromai. I don't know if the Europeans are going to bring Dromai, but I do know the Americans are, and I think that it could creep up into a top 3 played deck, to be honest. As crazy as it sounds, like I legitimately think that Dromai could be anywhere from the 3rd most played deck to like the 5th or 6th most played deck. It just really depends on people flip flop at the end here. And I think that's like the main thing you need to keep in mind. I think Icelander, we're talking about picking Briar. Icelander's seen some nerfs since the World Championships, and now we have. Like, I think Briar's in a better spot as Icelander sort of rotates out with a lot of Azalea floating around and it just not having the greatest matchup spread. Outside of that, I don't think there's too much more you really need to prepare on as a person looking at the Pro Tour planning to bring Briar. If you do think Bravo's going to show up, I think that this defense reaction package, I don't know if it makes it into the Bravo matchup, but you have it. I think the way it works with Briar is that you tend to just kind of fridge the one relevant attack Bravo has per game. But you have a defense reaction package to bring if you need to. But so that's my breakdown. Totally agree with you on as Oldhim being the rock of the format, and I do think it will be the most played deck. And then 2 and 3 are up for grabs. But the last point here is I do think the Europeans will bring Briar. I do think that they will come to a similar conclusion. I think they have shown historically that they are on this deck when other regions are not. And I think that there is like a budding scene in the US that is finding this deck. I mean, and you found it, of course. I think the Europeans there's going to be a lot of Briar. From the Europeans. Yeah, maybe not top 3 most played decks, but I do think the Europeans are going to bring Briar.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll talk about. Let me just say this first. I don't think Briar is the best deck, by the way, but I do think it is a very particular meta call that I think can work really well this weekend. So I just want to talk about some of the other decks because we talked about. I think Ultim and Lexi. I actually just think they're solidified as 1 and 2 this weekend, and I obviously could be wrong, but that's where I believe we're going to sit. I think Dromai and Azalea are probably, like you say, battling for 3rd. I think Bravo could, in all honesty, be up there as well. People are looking at Bravo as a deck that is better into the ranges. That is what people are looking at. But I think what will happen is people will just find that they can just build their Ultim. The thing is Ultim has such a wide spread of how you can build it that people have... It's actually so hard. You talked about Ultims will disagree or the Lexis will disagree about the side of the matchup. But actually what it comes down to is what people end up on for their lists, both for Lexis and Ultims. Ultims can range from a lot more defensive, looking to potentially fatigue Lexis, to really aggressive, to attack the ranges at a base level of on hits. They can be somewhere in between to have better matchups against, the Mirror and Dromai. Like the spread of Ultims is going to be really wide. So I actually think also Ultims asking the question of, hey, can you deal with my strategy to these other decks? Dromai, I think when you talk about Dromai, one thing I want to point out is that the conversion has not been that great for Dromai in these events we've seen, although it has been 1st, 2nd, 3rd most played deck at these events. But this might sound a little bit off base, so feel free to flame me a little in the comments. I think a lot of people that are choosing to play this deck at these events are not the top players. These aren't the players who are necessarily going to be playing at the PT. I think in the calling, we might see a higher representation of Dromai. But I think in the PT, I think people are going to have there is some really good Dromai players, and people have good reasons to play Dromai in this format, especially if they feel really steadfast in their Ranger matchup, then they have good reasons to play Dromai, and maybe they have a good plan into certain Ultim plans. Great. Good reasons to pick Dromai, right? Like, that deck is better than I think a lot of people think it is, but I also think it's worse than a lot of Dromai players think it is. So it's this funny one. Quickly as well, just to kind of harp on what you said, Azalea. Azalea is interesting. How many people play Azalea versus how many people play Lexi? I think that's kind of a boat of where people will be sitting in. I think the reason to play Azalea for this event is that if you feel like your Lexi matchup is good, then you play Azalea. I know I've seen and I've experienced both sides feeling good on both sides. Red in the Ledger is a hell of a card. And it can absolutely just decimate Lexi, and there's not particularly great ways for them to deal with it. So I think some people will decide to play Azalea. I think your auto matchup sucks. And I think for that reason, Azalea players, unless they've got these grand plans of how they're going to beat Ultim, are going to move towards decks like Lexi, maybe Briar, maybe even Ultim itself. So I think kind of in my head that makes Azalea less played. Now that is a reason that I like Briar a lot more, is I think Azalea is actually going to drop off coming into this weekend. I think Icelander just has such a tough time into these heroes and these plans. The plans are so widespread. Lexi is a terrible matchup for you, I think. And while I think you can maybe fix the Azalea matchup to a degree and get it somewhere close to 50-50, I don't think you can do that with Lexi in these current forms. So anyway, all this to say, I think that what I think the meta looks like is Ultim, Lexi, Dromai, Azalea, Bravo as the kind of the top 5 decks. And for that reason, that's why I would land on Briar for that reason. Also, I like playing this kind of deck because I think it has this ability to skew between aggressive and have these defensive packages, and also ask the question, Rosetta Thorn, Channel Mount Heroic, these are hell of cards.
Yep. I think there's a couple ancillary decks that will show up and could be decent. Yeah, it could be decently positioned, but I think that they're kind of leaving a lot up to Gem. That is, of course, Azuri. And then lastly, the one I actually think that is maybe better position is probably Dash, to be honest. But I don't think it's in a great slot. Outside of that, I don't see any of the other heroes being legitimate contentions. I had to submit a top 8 prediction, like a caster top 8 prediction, and my top 8 prediction was 4 Oldhim, 1 Lexi, 1 Azalea, 1 Briar, 1 Dromai, because I feel like those last 4 are flip in. Like it's just kind of totally random, and I think those are going to be the most played decks. I also think that Briar is just going to be, even though it's not sort of showing up in the meta right now, I think the Europeans will bring it. I think it's a good deck, and then as Hayden is going to show, it seems to be well positioned. But yeah, I do think that we're looking at potentially like 4 Oldhim in the top 8. I think the Oldhim is just, I think the Oldhim is just the rock in this format. Like it is a really good deck, and Oldhim is the Dash question on steroids. Like if you sit in front of Dash, you got to wonder, okay, are we getting fatigued? Are we doing items? This Exodia, are we getting boost on? Oldhim is like, I am the best sort of value deck, or I'm the best fatigue deck. That is very hard to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what? Dash, because the question I think we've got to address Dash. Mm-hmm. I think Dash could sneak in and be in the top 5 actually. If this happens, if people look at this super defensive Dash sort of control deck and they feel like they have a way to fatigue the ranges, I don't think they do. I think they like to think that they can get there. I think it's actually still unfavored because immediately you see the first few cards from Dash, you can understand what their plan is. And I think that is for the Azaleas, ranges of the world with codexes and these, particularly Lexi. I don't see how you can fatigue Lexi. The output of turn damage they can produce by setting things up is just crazy, crazy, crazy. If Ultim can barely do it, then I don't see how Dash is doing it. They've got less cards in the deck, so for one. But that is one thing, right? But so I think some people will decide Dash because they feel like that is that. They feel like they have a good Ultim matchup. If Ultim's the best deck, hey, if I have this Dash control deck that can prey on Ultims because they can't devote enough cards for me, like Warhorn packages, for instance, and sort of recycling packages, Remembrance, etc., then great, I've got a good matchup there and potentially the best deck. And I think that's why people will choose to play it, and then maybe they feel like they can get their range of matchup somewhere reasonable. I don't personally see that, but the one thing I do want to quickly point out with Dash is that people could actually decide to play aggro Dash, like super boost Dash, if they think that the Ultims can't go fatigue because they need to be proactive into the mirror and ranges, for instance. Then all of a sudden, you've got this deck that Dash, when it's like doing its thing and being super aggressive, is one of the most explosive decks in the format. Now, what you have to deal with is potential a little bit of range disruption and Azalea disruption, but if you feel like you can deal with that, then maybe you play aggro Dash. I wouldn't touch it, but some people might.
Yeah, I think it's a super bold pick, boost Dash into this meta. I would be, like you said, if I sat down and I was sitting across from a Dash player and they turned out to be boost, I would definitely be surprised. Probably wouldn't be what I pre-boarded for, to be honest. Like, we talk about the Dash question, but at the Pro Tour, I would pretty much only expect my opponent to be on one version of Dash because I think the other version just
currently,
probably can't squeak in. Yeah. But yeah, I think that does sum up sort of our meta breakdown, and gives sort of the method to the madness of why you picked your deck. Let's talk about the Pro Tour in terms of how it's set up. So we have day 1, which is 4 rounds of Swiss at the beginning, 4 rounds of classic constructed Swiss, and then 3 rounds of booster draft. So that is different from the World Championships. And then we flip it on Saturday, which is 3 rounds of.
There's a cut first, right? The cut's day 2.
All
you
players
do have to
with
make
4
it into day
or
2.
more wins go to day 2. And then on day 2, there's 3 rounds of Swiss booster draft and 4 rounds of Swiss classic constructed. And that's, of course, cut to top 8. Top 8 is top 8, but it begins at 9 a.m. single elimination class constructed, what we're used to. So, Hayden, does the flip-flop of where the draft is in the day, does that change your strategy at all? Does it change how you think about the tournament at all, or is it completely inconsequential?
It probably shouldn't, but it does a little bit. I think it, in theory, there's this whole idea. It's like, well, if you have constructed second and you have draft first, in theory, the better players are at, the higher brackets, right? And so you would less likely to face random rogue decks. But that's not necessarily true. Like, some people might be draft experts, but they might be taking a punt on CC. You might just get the kind of random gem pairing anyway. You might not have that good a draft front, and then you get put in the 1-2 or the 2-1 bracket, and you're playing, for instance, in my case, I'm playing Briar. Spoiler alert, I'm playing 0 Arcane Barrier on my deck, which we'll talk about, which is a choice I'm making because I think that the Wizards are going to be pretty lowly represented. I think it's a really tough choice to pick to play a Wizard in this format. But, maybe I end up in the 2-1 bracket with a couple of Icelanders, so it could go either way. I honestly, all in all, I think it doesn't matter. I think you try and define the meta, you pick the deck for CC that is best in that meta for you to play, and then you just have a good draft strategy and you go for it. So I don't think it changes it too much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, that's good to know. In terms of draft, are you expecting to see sort of any strategy percolate above another? Like, is there one hero that you are maybe shying away from because you think people will be in it more? Is there something you think is just easier to play that players are going to latch onto? Like, what is a super high level sort of, day one draft strategy you would keep in mind as a player going to the Pro Tour?
Yeah, let me just give you the overview of what I think is going to happen at this PT when it comes to draft. I think players are overwhelmingly going to avoid Ranger. I think people think that Ranger is not only hard to draft, but if there's 3 Rangers at the table, you probably you just have a terrible deck, all 3 players. So I think people are going to actively avoid Ranger, and by that, and I mean they're going to ship the Ranger cards. I think the other thing is that the overwhelming strategy is people are going to stay open. People are going to pick generics early. They're going to pick the hybrid cards early, and they're going to have a lot of people are going to have preference to be an assassin. It's safe. It can support 4 players at the table really easily with good decks. It is, I think, what people feel comfortable with, having more exposure and discussions in the sort of community and people playing it. I think it's a bit more sort of straightforward as well. So I think that's kind of the overall of what we'll see. Me personally, I wouldn't be avoiding Ranger. I would be looking to stay open like other people will be. And if I get a sniff that there's an Azalea deck at the table that I could be into, I'm into it. Like, I think if I can be the only Azalea at the table, I feel really confident that I can draft a really strong 3-0 deck. My problem with Riptide and why I think people are avoiding Ranger is because the traps are really good in this format and Assassin wants them. And if you've got 5 people at the table fighting for these hybrid traps, and one of them's Riptide, 4 of them's Assassin, the Riptide really needs them. That sucks for you. So Riptide is I agree, people are avoiding it for a good reason. You can still have a good Riptide deck, but I think it's the weakest hero, unfortunately. I think the last one I want to highlight is I think people will potentially try and force Ninja, thinking that it's a little bit underdrafted.
Oh wow!
And they can set up these potentially really strong Katsu or Benji decks.
Interesting.
That's more of a niche strategy, but I think we will see that.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to, I don't know, try to read the social dynamics of past Pro Tours, and just going off what you said there with. There being a lot more information out about Assassin and supporting more players, being easier to play. I would think that there's going to be a lot of people at this tournament that are going to, they'll take a little bit of a punt on draft, not practice as much as they should, and they'll probably just go force Assassin. I think that is like we've seen that is a very relevant and actually reasonable strategy in Flesh and Blood to maybe get a 2-1 out of that pod. So yeah, I'd be surprised, but I'll defer to you if you think that people might be forcing Ninja because if they do it early enough, they can get a ridiculous deck.
Yeah, I'm not saying that people won't force Assassin. I think people will. Maybe they've just found that they have a lot better success with Assassin. They can immediately force it and be in one of the 4 Assassins. What I want to point out, though, is there's a bit of an issue with trying to force Assassin, I think. Is that if Assassin is the best class in this draft because it can support, and I'm not saying because it's going to be the strongest necessarily, but because it can support the most number of players, if you first pick an Assassin card, say out of your pack, we don't know pack distributions, but it's almost impossible that the person to your left is going to know you've taken an Assassin card. They could be taking generics, then the next pack they take another generic, and then they flow through to like a hybrid card or a rare or something. Because of the pack distribution in this, it's a lot harder to isolate than it was for, say, Uprising. I think people will naturally have this tendency to stay open and then probably move towards Assassin if it doesn't feel overwhelmingly like Ninja or Ranger are open. And you could end up as like one of 5 Assassins, even if you're forcing. I think forcing doesn't dictate downstream. Like if I use an example, last format, if you got a pack past you, Brendan, and was missing a Dromai card, you were staying as million miles away from Dromai, right?
Yep.
And it was really easy to tell. You could even tell with Icelander as well. You're staying a million miles away. But would you stay away from Fire even if it was missing a card from the pack?
Nope.
No. And I think we're going to see something similar with Assassins. So I just think that people will force it, like you said, but I just don't know if it's necessarily as much of a strategy as, say, forcing Fire was in the last format.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question I have for you is just, what do you think the pack distribution is going to be? Do you think they're going to do Belgian one day, Japanese the other day, or do you think they're going to do a custom mix?
I think they're going to do what they originally printed on the site. So I think probably what they're going to do is, I'm thinking like practicality of sourcing product in the US, I think probably what they're going to do is they have mostly Belgian product in the US. I think they're going to open Belgian product, and they're going to, anything that's massively out of the norm, they're going to fix the pack or just discard the pack and move on. So I think you could have 1 to 3 rares, as it does say. I think you're going to have, you could have 1 to 3 class commons as well. Honestly, I don't know. I think that works practically, but
I think Path of Least Resistance, they obviously, they have a lot going on, and even without this whole distribution issue, so these drafts, like, people get packs that are messed up. Like, I mean, there's a lot that goes into, I think, preparing a draft to happen at a Pro Tour. I think they're going to go Path of Least Resistance. I think they're going to do Belgian one day, Japanese the other day, because I think that is, if the sourcing issue, if all is equal on the sourcing issue and they can't get enough product there, I think that will be the easiest thing for them to do, and they will see that as a fair solution to all players.
Do you know the problem is that you can tell as soon as you open the packs, the card
for sure.
stock is different. So this is what I'm worried is going to happen. And just let me get on my soapbox for one quick second. We'll move on because I've talked enough about how much this issue annoys me to no end. If they decide to just use Belgian for the whole time, and I could see this happening, and they just don't tell people, they go, we've got a solution. And the solution is we're just going to use Belgian and not tell people that it's Belgian. As soon as you pick up that pack and you feel the card stock, okay, it's Belgian card stock, it's not Japanese card stock. And then after a couple of packs, you see that, the only thing you're not going to know is the distribution. Like, maybe they have changed the distribution. That sounds like a lot of work. My thought is they probably haven't, and they were probably just going to end up with Belgian packs. And in that case, I think it's a really crappy solution, to be honest. I think they've kind of deceived players a little bit, but whatever, is what it is.
Yep. All right, so let's go into the deck. Let's lead off with some of the sort of high-level question, which were, what are some of the key learnings from your testing process in preparation to this Pro Tour? Did anything stand out? And when you obviously you landed on Briar, but were there any other heroes in that process that you maybe thought about picking instead?
Yeah, so we're going to go, you've obviously got these top-level questions. So if people are looking for the deck list, it's going to be down in the description, and Brendan's going to bring some graphics up a little bit later if you're on video as we get into breaking down the deck a little bit. My key learnings from testing were really that, like I said, I'll just keep these pretty top level. Ultimate's going to define the format. Rangers are really, really good. Lexi is my preference of Ranger if I was going to play a Ranger, I think. My also learnings from Ranger is that Ranger mirrors suck. They are really not fun to play. I don't think the Lexi mirror is fun to play at all. So that was my personal learning. Ultimate's really strong. Dromai is better than I think I necessarily thought, but it still is a deck that's going to struggle. And that Briar had this kind of position in the meta where you can have, and the reason then ultimately that I would land on Briar, I think, for this PT and the deck list I'm going to present, is that I think you have a good matchup to Ultim. I feel really good about that matchup. I think your matchup into Dromai is good. I think your matchup into Lexi with the plan I'm going to show you is also reasonable. I think it's somewhere around, I'll give a range. It's somewhere between 40 and 60, depending on deck lists and stuff, I think. I think your Azalea matchup is tough, but I think that's coming to drop off a little bit. So that's kind of my key learnings from testing, was why I thought Briar was well positioned. Okay.
Well, let's just go ahead and get into the deck, starting off with the equipment. And this is one of my favorite sets of equipment I've ever seen on a deck. Okay, I'll just read it from the top too for any audio listeners. It's Crown of Providence, Fandel Spring Tunic, Grasp of the Arcanite, Rosetta Thorn, and Snapdragon Scalers. That's it.
That's it, baby. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the deck list is really, really tight because there's basically 2 kind of key game plans or 3 key game plans happening in this deck. And there's no room for Arcane Barrier, I'll tell you what. So my advice would be is if you're looking to play Briar, maybe something similar to this list for the calling, for instance, I would probably get Crown of Dichotomy in for the Icelander matchup. The problem is the Icelander matchup sucks. Like, it is your worst match, one of your worst matchups, I think. And one piece of Nullrune doesn't really help you. Just win the die roll and go first and try and steamroll them. Like, honestly, the matchup sucks, even if you have Crown of Dichotomy. So, there's no room for it. Another card's more important to me than something like Crown of Dichotomy. Now, the other option is, Kano, worried about Kanos, keep the Crown of Dichotomy and the Shock Charmers. Again, just don't think mini Kanos are going to show up.
You can erase them too. Like, that's the thing. Is like this deck. It's not great. It's not great, but it's the same strategy you'd have against Isolated. Just win the die roll and beat them down and hope they don't draw the card. That's it.
Yeah. And this deck list comes down to the metagame prediction, and I just predict that Wizards can't be that well supported. So, yeah, very nice, clean set of equipment there. You play the same equipment in every single matchup, Brendan.
All right. Well, let's head on to the main deck. I'm going to read this all out, so I know it's going to be a mouthful, but for audio listeners, I know it's important. So, 3 Bramble Spark, 3 Channel Mod Heroic, 1 Coax of Commotion, we'll come back there, 3 E-Strike, 3 Give and Take, 3 Lightning Surge, 3 Nimblism, 3 Premeditate, 3 Ravenous Rabble, 3 Scar for Scar, 3 Snatch, 3 Swarming Blue Veil, and those are all reds, of course, and then we go into the blues. There are no yellows in the deck. So 3 blue Autumn's Touch, 3 blue Earth Lore Surge, 3 blue Force of Nature, 3 blue So Tomorrow, 1 This Round's on Me, and 3 Tome of Harvest. Anything? I'll let you take it away from there, Hayden.
Yeah, so it's a 50 card core deck, basically. You're basically playing all of these cards in every single matchup. 1 or 2 cards might tweak because of some cards that need to come in over the top of things, but this is basically the core of the deck in terms of attack actions versus non-attack actions. So it's what is the final result? 2, 3, 4, 7, 8. So it's there's 25 non-attack actions in the deck. So you kind of bring in 5 non-attack actions, 5 attack actions into the sideboard. But there's also, we're going to get to it, there's defense reaction package in the sideboard. So a lot of the time it's more about the attack actions coming in, and that's matchup dependent. So I don't know, where do you want to start? I can start with
I want to start with the weird cards, to be honest.
Sure.
Because there's obviously, Briar's been around for a long time, and this deck looks similar to that. Most Briar decks do, but there are some standouts. Let's start with Premeditate. I think this is a card that I think is very powerful. It's, plunder run at home, I guess, but it's strong, and I know there's Briar lists. I was talking with Tarek Patel today, who I'm going to be on Twitter Space. He didn't have the card in his list. What do you like about Premeditate? What is the function of this deck? And is that Ponder token as strong, or is it strong enough that it can compare it to something like a Plunder Run? Is it a similar effect?
Yeah. So Premeditate is a card that I think people, no one's kind of like, it's fine. People either think it's unplayable in Briar and you should be staying away from it, or they think, like me, that it's very, very good and a very powerful tool. I think the one thing I'll talk about, so Nimblism is very good, right? Now, Premeditate is Nimblism on steroids, and the Ponder token also allows you to play around Inertia, which in 2 of your tougher matchups is one of the cards that can really sort of destroy any sort of setup you can have. Now, the kind of concern with, I guess, Ponder is like, hey, what if you draw, the blue? So Premeditate is a card that you have to adapt your patterns of gameplay, or the way you play a little bit. And to say that is that you want to be setting attack actions up in your arsenal so that when you draw this card, you have the full effect of it. And it's also so that you keep Crown around longer so that you can potentially Crown out a blue if you draw it. Now, most of the blues are fine anyway, because of what you tweak into the matchups where Premeditate has its full effect. So this round's on me. We have 2 more in the sideboard for a particular matchup, which we'll talk about. But other than sort of Tome and Autumn's Touch, the other blues can be serviceable. But they're also a smaller part of the deck as well. And then I guess with that attack action sort of gameplay and putting that attack action to your arsenal, that is actually one of the better ways to play Briar anyway. And I think people move away from that. I actually think Premeditate encourages better play patterns. It means that when you draw Channel Mountain Heroics, Bramble Sparks, all these kind of draws, you have better setup. And Premeditate is no different. So basically, I think, you've got a card that can be 0 for 5 or 6, and it's a non-attack action, which is half an embodiment. I think you should be playing this card, but I can see why people aren't. But for me, in this list in particular, it's really good. And that's another reason why Give and Take's in the list as well. Natural Go again.
All right. Yeah. Talk to me about Give and Take. You said Natural Go again.
Yeah.
Does it have any other function in the deck?
Yeah, it blocks 3 as well, which is actually really important to have a non-attack action that blocks 3. It cost structure wise, it actually works in well because it costs 1. So off of a blue, it actually works pretty well in this deck. Into Ultim as well, it is just a really, really strong piece of card you can have, into the late game. But also the other thing it actually does into things like, Dromai, or even into maybe say some of the ranges that want to be blocking a little bit, is that this can increase the sort of power level of your draws. So you're going to find that some of the time, you pair this with an attack buff with Bramble Spark, Nimblism, whatever, and people are looking to defend this card, you're going to get really good benefit out of this, which is that you're going to be able to put, rather than, you're going to fix your draw effectively. It's like sort of opting a little bit. It's like getting a more relevant card on top of your deck. So the default was always, well, it gets back Channel Mount Heroic, and it can, and that's really important against matchups like Ultim. But the other thing this does is get back just important pieces of attack or non-attack actions for your next following turn, based on what you put in Arsenal. I'm going to end with an attack action here. Premeditate's really good next turn, for instance. So, Give and Take, I think, has a lot of value in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very powerful attack. Let's talk about the 2 1-ofs in the main deck. They do some very different roles, but the 1 Coast of Commotion and the 1 This Round's on Me. Talk to me about those.
So Coax Commotion through my testing has been 3 of, it's been a 2 of, it's been a 1 of, it's been a none of. It's a tech that I think is fine. It's really powerful when you pair it with Embodiment of Lightning and Channel Mount Heroic and sort of really big turns, right? Especially into matchups like Ultimate. It does shine quite a lot. The problem I have with that card is that, it's a lot of the time it's just it says nothing. In a lot of aggro matchups, it's literally doing nothing. You're choosing no mode on that card, which can be a problem. So I think it's the weakest of those kind of options, that and sort of Entwine Lightning, which can gain go again depending on what you're playing in your deck. So basically, this has kind of been a flex spot for other attack actions. And so in some matchups, what this means, because the deck is so tight, is that you actually have to play other just generic 0 for 4 attack, 2 defenses like Exude Confidence or Infectious Host, which is sitting in the sideboard, which we'll talk about. So this is kind of just the fact that there's a slot for this to fit in, and it's better than those generic options. Now, this would be the first card to be cut if I was looking for another option to fit in, because I don't think this is much of an upgrade on just a generic 0 for 4, except in the Ultimate matchup, which is relevant because we've talked about how good that deck is. But I think this deck is kind of set up for Ultimate anyway.
Sorry to tangent, but I just wanted to ask you: did you during your testing process, did you ever revisit the deck that we had at Pro Tour Baltimore prior to switching the sort of go tall Briar deck with Rise of Replenishment? It does seem like it could be potentially powerful against Ultim, but also against something like Azalea, because you are able to play those taller attacks.
Stir the Wildwood.
Yeah, Stir the Wildwood. What did I say?
Yeah,
Rise of Replenishment. Yeah, Rise of Replenishment is in this deck, but Stir the Wildwood.
Briefly, I think the main problem. So Explosive Growth is like the big marquee of like why I think you want to do that. Again, it's another attack action that blocks 3, and it's one that can really punish, particularly Ranger, because it doesn't want to be throwing cards to prevent arcane damage, or even blocking for that matter. So you can really have these massive big turns. I think I actually think that deck is pretty good and is worth revisiting some more. I think my kind of problem I had with that is that the way that kind of particularly Azalea is playing is, I don't think it's good to Azalea, and even Lexi, like depending on your draw, it can just be worse. And it makes it really hard to play something like the defensive package. You have too many of these cards that don't synergize together, don't work well together. And Creepers requires you to have a few turns, and sometimes you just don't get those. So I actually think it's pretty close. I liked Explosive Growth. I think a card like Stir the Wildwood into reasonably go tall is good. I don't think that's particularly good into Guardian, though, is the problem as well, Stir.
Yeah, I recall our experience back then. I believe that deck was beating, pretty much everything except the mirror. Turns out Pro Tour Lil was all mirrors. So, not a great pick.
Well, Explosive Growth was great in the mirror, but
Yep. All right, let's head into the sideboard, Hayden.
Well, quickly, you asked about this rounds on me, right? Actually, we can talk about that in the sideboard, I think.
We've got 2 more.
I did just want
to... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, any other kind of like call-outs in this main deck, there's not really any kind of other, I guess, call-outs. It's a 16 blues is kind of what I like to play, but for certain matchups there is more. So yeah, probably good to go to sideboard.
Okay, so I'll read it off. 3 Command and Conquer, 1 Down and Dirty. 2 red Earthor Surge, 3 Exude Confidence, 3 Infectious Host, 2 red Rites of Punishment, 3 red Sink Below, 3 Sonata Arcanics, 3 red Unmovable, and 2 blue. This round's on me. Hayden, it's a sideboard, so I think we just got to go literally left to right, top down. Just talk to me about every single card, to be honest.
Well, this is where the spice is anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. All right, come in and conquer. Is it well positioned in this format? Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, we're sitting in a format of ranges. Also, it's a popper into Dromai. Dromai is very good. But yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say about it, to be honest.
Yep. Down and dirty.
So Down and Dirty is the sort of, I guess it's the 79th or 80th card in the deck right now. Maybe that or Cokes. And a big part of it is actually, shout out to Nick Butcher. He sort of suggested this as kind of maybe a last card to add into the deck. The Dromai matchup is can be somewhere from good to fine, depending on what sort of version they're playing. But some of your poppers can be a little bit awkward, and Down and Dirty is just the best card in the matchup. This card is going to be so interesting when we get to the next format and we have more Illusionist in the format, because a lot of the problems sometimes you have when you're playing into a deck like Briar into Dromai, for instance, is that sometimes you draw the poppers and they just want to defend out with their defensive cards and maybe develop their board with a single dragon, for instance. And now all of a sudden you're stuck with this attack that doesn't really work with your Channel of Heroic turn that you've maybe got going on, or it doesn't really work with the kind of cost structure of your hand. So it's what am I actually doing with this card? Sometimes you're even just having to pitch it. It feels terrible. Down and Dirty can obviously be a much better option to sit in Arsenal and then just defend with next turn, or you even just attack with it. So I think it's if I was really expecting a lot of Dromai, maybe I'd even try and fit 2 Down and Dirty in my deck.
All right, 2 red Orthor Surge.
Yeah, Earthor Surge, I think, is really, really important into the Ultimate matchup. I think this is super MVP in that matchup. Also, I just really like Earthor Surge because of the cost structure with 0 costs in the deck. So let's say your hand is blue, Scar for a Scar, and Earthor Surge. You're looking at 13 damage right there across those 3 cards. That is, what decks can give you 13 damage off 3 cards? Not many. So that's another reason I think that card's just really, really strong.
Exude Confidence also for the Ultimate matchup, I would assume.
Yeah, Ultim, obviously Icelander as well, if those are coming up. But as well, Exude Confidence if you're expecting decks to, maybe as defensive dash, for instance, as well. This card just provides you ways to make their life a lot more difficult, which is exactly what you want.
All right, this is the one that I had the first. So when I looked at this list, I was like, okay, this is the card that stood out to me, and I was like, what is this? All right, 3 red Infectious Host. What are they doing?
Beating up on your Lexi opponents. This is probably the best card in the Lexi matchup. This is what I think makes... So one thing... So Lexi, if you look at the last format, Briar versus Lexi, it was, seen as kind of Lexi favored, the ice Lexi decks. But, we saw Tarek was a pretty big proponent of cards like Talisman of Warfare, for instance, and having options to use your equipment well and sort of just, get through that matchup. He thought it was pretty close, I think. I would say now that they've moved away from ice, that's a big help. There's still a couple of cards in there. There's Winter's Bite. They do have some disruptive elements to a degree. But mostly what they're doing is, just coming in with good arrows, going wide and presenting, you with these tokens, with these frailty, these blood rot, these inertia tokens. And Infectious Host, as soon as they put one of those on the board, you're not wanting to defend most of those arrows. You just, you're taking the damage, but you get to push it back. So you're looking at a 0 for 6 on something like Infectious Host. So you're really upping what your 0 for 4s are doing into 0 for 6s, sometimes 0 for 8s. That is huge, and that is why Infectious Host is such an important card in the matchup. It's also good against Lexi. They're doing something similar. Let's say they do come in with a Dominate Arrow that gives you a Blood Rot Pox, for instance. Maybe you can defend with 1 card. On your next turn, you could have come in with a 0 for 4, but in this instance, you actually come back in for a 0 for 6. So you get to, if they've written the Legend, for instance, and gave you a Blood Rot Pox. So it's all just giving you additional value in that Ranger matchup, which is really important in how you need to be able to win that matchup.
Okay.
It's all numbers.
Yeah. 2 red Drone of Brutality. Retro Replenishment. Oldham.
Yeah.
And
Oldham.
Poppers.
I mean, yeah, poppers.
Do you even take them
somewhat
into
relevant.
Jemai? Do you max out your poppers?
Yeah.
Or? Okay.
Yeah, max out your poppers, I think. Unless you know that they're playing in a particular way where they're not going to play in poppers, or they're playing a more defensive deck where they're going to look for Chromais and Miragais first. But even still, I think, defense for 3, it's 6 damage on a stick, or it's a popper. So I think you probably still have to play these. But yeah, mostly for the Ultimate matchup, for the fatigue matchups, which how much Ultimate fatigue is going to show up with PT, hard to know, but I think I definitely want these 2 slots. You could also play Evergreen. Evergreen has if you're not expecting that much Ultim Fatigue, you could play Evergreen because it has a better sort of use. It's just a more useful card into other matchups. Yeah. Also much better as a threat into something like Joromai if you have to just play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, fuses Force of Nature. It's definitely not zero. Okay, on to the 3 red sink below. I mean, adding defense reactions. The immovables, you see that, and you're like, okay, I know that's there. Obviously, we got to go to all Azalea. We've got these Rangers hitting you with hard on-hit effects, but the 4 0 for 4 defense reactions making their way into your Briar deck. What are they for? Like, why do you have them in the
3
deck?
of them.
3 of them, sorry.
Yeah, there's 3. Yeah,
0
3
for 4,
belows.
and there's 3 of them. That's it.
Yeah, I'll talk about them together. So you've got 3 sink below and 3 red unmovable.
Mm-hmm.
So these are Ranger packages. You asked before, are you defense reactions for Bravo, for instance? I prefer not to. If I'm going in Bravo, I think there's maybe some argument to play the sink belows. I'm not playing enough blues in that matchup to support the unmovables, I think. So sink belows, Ranger, both Rangers, Lexi and Azalea. The way you're using your sink belows all the time is to... The card filter is actually super relevant, by the way, but a lot of the time you're pairing it with a card from hand plus the sink below from Arsenal, or you're pairing it with a piece of equipment to stop a particular on-hit effect and then pivoting with 4 cards on your turn, is what you're often doing in those matchups. And then unmovable is just for Azalea, so not for Lexi, it's just for Azalea for the go tool, and I think it's super relevant and you need it, and you have some extra blues to balance that out.
Why do you have 3 Sonata Arcanics in the sideboard?
Because if you're playing the defensive package into these ranges, you don't play Sonata, basically. But, Ultims, decks where you're not bringing in these defense reactions, you play Sonata. It's still super powerful. It's a card that I actually don't particularly like Sonata because I hate not having consistency in my decks, but the card is too powerful when you do have a 30-30 split to not be playing.
Okay. Finally here, this round's on me. 1 in the main deck, 2 in the sideboard.
Yeah, so these extra blue slots, I've played around with a lot of cards. I think there's a few criteria you want, right? So you definitely want a card that defends for 3 right now because of just, Ranger in this format. So I think you have to play one of these generic blues that defend for 3. People have played, Whisper of the Oracle in the past. Sift is kind of the upgrade on that now. I played around with Oath of the Arknight for quite a while. Because I think it's a blue that gives you this block 3/block 4 with an embodiment, and then into some of the more defensive matchups just has a lot more value, and a lot more value if you do get blue flooded. The problem I have with that card is that, it's more for, like I say, maybe more defensive decks to have these over blues. On the other hand, though, this round's on me is one of the best cards you can see, like, turn 0 against Lexi. Mm-hmm. And I think the only reason I'm playing this is literally, it's a blue that blocks 4 and sideboards in for unmovables and for defensive purposes, but also it does have really good utility against Lexi, and that's where you want it.
Okay. I mean, that sums up the deck. Let's talk about, what's sort of the core philosophy behind the deck? Can you talk a little bit, speak to maybe first the disparity between your Briar deck and, maybe some more popularized lists that are floating around right now? In what slots have you specifically chosen to add cards that aren't in those other Briar decks? And why do you believe those cards give you an edge in the context of the meta?
I think it's mostly premeditate and probably the infectious host and the 6 defense reactions. I think we've seen a few different ways to use Briar. So some people have gone with Comfortify, for instance, and trying to be a bit slower, a bit more mid-rangey. I would say this deck is still the core fundamental is to be aggressive and is to use these other cards as ways to pivot, as ways to buy turns so that you continue to be aggressive. So sink belows, unmovables. And then the other thing is that premeditate obviously changes the way that you have to play when you don't have those cards in the deck, which is that you play with, I guess, an Arsenal setup a lot of the time. Now, that's obviously a lot harder into some matchups than others, but where you can do it, you get massive payoff. So I would say this deck is not that different. It just has some tweaks to the play patterns, and 1 to 3 turns per game look quite different to what you do with normal Briar, and you have to make some value-orientated decisions about when you're going to be able to, how you're going to be able to set yourself up for future turns, and making sure that you don't put yourself in a position where you just get absolutely crushed by your draws. That's kind of, so I'd say it's a little bit harder to play to a degree. You've got to think a little bit more about what your future turns are going to look like for premeditates, for your Crown of Providence, for instance, for your defense reactions and what happens when you draw those. But overall, it's not too dissimilar, I would say.
All right, let's get into matchups. Talk to me about your Oldhim matchup. And the first question for an Oldhim matchup is, how are you pre-boarding and what archetype are you expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm going to expect mid-range to / defensive ultims. I don't think we're going to see, last one we saw a lot of 3 red glacial footsteps, 3 red thunderquake, for instance. I think they're going to focus more on the on hits because of ranger, or they're going to focus on being defensive. So I'm gonna set up for that. I'm gonna leave the defense reactions in the sideboard, but you're bringing in your sonatas. Exude confidence, obviously really important. Earth or Surge are really important in the matchup, and basically you're just trying to play how you normally would into Ultim. You're trying to garner value, set up good 5-card hands, find channel mount heroic turns, give and take, premeditate. Both are going to help you in the matchup as well.
Do you believe it is favored or unfavored?
Favored. I mean, I've always thought it's been great for Briar. But,
all right, on to Lexi.
Yeah, Lexi. So this is where you are bringing in the Sink Belows, the CNCs, and this round's on me, obviously. And this matchup is, I think I take out 1 premeditate in these matchups. The reason I still like premeditate, especially into Lexi, you're just playing the 3 Sink Belows, and yes, they do have inertia, Seeking Destroys, but you can always play out your hand. There's no reason you're not going to play out your hand. So you're not going to get cards stuck in Arsenal, and worst comes to worst, you have Crown. So you can still be pretty aggressive. You are trading damage with them. You're just looking to block key attacks, and when they're doing particular sort of things, and then you're trying to find your big turns and race them effectively.
Okay. What do you think? What should we put as the third most important deck? Like what is the, I don't know, the third most represented, or what would you put in that?
Let's take a punt.
Okay.
Dromai. Let's talk Dromai.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, this is where you have your poppers for. Obviously, that's where they're going to shine. And I would say it's how you play this matchup is really going to depend on what the Dromai is doing. I would say that often the way I'm playing this is using Rosetta Thorn to clean up key dragons, but you do have to point damage at their face. Like, they will amass advantage if you let them. They will set up Ash, they will use their defensive cards to keep their life total pretty high while you're trying to clean up certain things, and they might even just stack up Ash Wings on you, for instance, plus 1 or 2 key dragons, and then they can actually turn the tide of the game with some of their more aggressive cards. So you do need to be pressuring their life total, you do need to be going at them, you do need to find a good channel mount heroic turn to send straight at their face. So poppers help with that. You've also got premeditate package, etc.
Do you feel good in the mirror with this deck, or do you think the other Briar decks that have more popularized or at least more public right now are favored against you?
It's a great question. I haven't really thought about the mirror too much because I just don't think it's going to show up that much. I think the decks look pretty similar, to be honest. I'd say you have access to a couple more 3 blocks, which is quite nice. I mean, the mirror, as the mirror match is hard to get an edge in, to be honest. So I don't think it's necessarily better or worse.
Do we need to make any distinction? We talked about Lexi, but do we need to make a distinction for Azalea? Is it? Yeah,
so Azalea is different. So this matchup, you are definitely looking to pick your spots a bit more. You are looking to be, I guess, you're trying to protect your life total to some degree, because if they land, you can't really do much against a Red and Ledger turn unless you have the unmovable or the Sink Below in Arsenal, or the unmovable in hand plus equipment. So you do really need to pick your spots, and sometimes you actually want to let the Red and Ledger hit. You actually want to let it just take it and set up for future turns, because just because they're coming for Red and Ledger doesn't mean you can't do anything, right? Like, you can block with a card from hand. So say you have a 4-card hand. Say you've just had an aggressive turn or something and they've taken the damage to Red and Ledger you could be in a position where it's just like, okay, block with 1 card, and then I pitch and come in with like a CNC on my turn or something, or an E-Strike for something. That's why E-Strike also really good for 7. And then you just Arsenal the last card, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, they Red and Ledger me, but I didn't lose any value out of that, or not much value out of it. So often, you might be taking Red and Ledgers. You're just looking for kind of good ways to control the game. The games can actually go kind of long. They can also defend quite well. So if you just go sort of balls to the wall, for lack of a better term, and just go straight out at them, they can actually defend your key turns and then come back at you with better on hits while you're taking damage. So, sometimes if they're not dominating an arrow, they're coming in for 7 or something. Sometimes I am throwing 2 or 3 cards at them to stop their on hit effect.
Do you think
it's a dynamic matchup?
To sort of circle back, do you think you're favored or unfavored into Lexi?
I think it depends on the build. I think my experience has been you're favored into what the current builds look like.
Okay, favorite.
That's the reason I'm playing the deck.
Yeah, favored or unfavored into Azalea?
I think you're slightly unfavored.
Okay. I would love to hear another favorite. I'm just like, you preface it with this might not be the best deck, but it's favored into everything.
Well, like that's the reason I'm playing it, right? Is I think you've got really good options into, or the reason I would play it, you've got really good options into these matchups. So I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't believe that you're somewhere close to favored into most of these matchups.
Is there anything else you want to mention about the deck, the meta, anything regarding it, or maybe some matchups maybe we didn't talk about quite yet? I mean, Icelander, like you said, you're trying to dodge it, from what I understand, for the most part. If you pair into it, go first, run them over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's your plan. A couple of things I wanted to point out with the deck is just some sort of things. So Premeditate is a really good card against Inertia and the Arsenal Destruction as well. You can obviously stack those so that you draw the card after the Inertia, so you get to keep your Arsenal potentially. The other thing as well is that I think Give and Take is a card that I think I kind of touched on this already, but you want to use that strategically. It's not just always, Channel My Hero goes back on top of my deck. It's often really contingent on the game state. And if you're forcing your opponent to defending with it, like sometimes Bramble Spark is one of the best cards you can get back, for instance. Or if they block with 2 cards, Bramble Spark and a blue or Channel. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to play that card. And I think the other thing as well is that in a lot of matchups, your turns can look quite dynamic. This isn't necessarily flat out aggro. Like you are using your cards to defend in some situations. You are trying to protect your life total to find good pivot turns, especially because this meta looks like a lot of on-hit effects. So you do need to be aware of that.
Yeah. I had a question, but I kind of lost that question. I was going to ask, like, did you ever consider cutting the Tome Harvest because if it's, the lack of ability to Arsenal and Alpha, something like a Premeditate? And then I was like, oh, Crown of Providence, lol. And I'm assuming that's the answer.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of, so you could play, I don't know, Weave Earth, for instance, over it, but like, do you want to Weave Earth how much better is a Weave Earth in your arsenal than just nothing in your arsenal? And the answer is pretty minimal, right? So if you draw the tome, you can just not arsenal it.
Yeah.
But it's small. Or
you can just Arsenal Crown it. And like, I think the tome as well, like after Crown of Providence, I think that before Crown of Providence was printed, the tome was a question, especially back in the old Plunder Index and stuff like that. But nowadays, like the one freebie is all you need. And the card itself is really freaking good. Like when you draw the full non-attack action hand and you're like, oh, I've got a tome, straight to the bank.
It's also with Hearth and Embodiment. It's actually just, it's really good.
All right. Anything else before we close out?
Actually, sorry, just on that. Tome is also an out as well. So like you arsenal your So Tomorrow or whatever, you draw into a tome off your Premeditate, you draw your tome turn, and you've got fuel for your tome. That's sort of the other thing to point out. No, I think that does it. Deck list is down in the description. I think I've even like left on this particular version of the deck. I think there's even some like sideboarding notes. This isn't necessarily reflective of how I would 100% sideboard. I just want to point that out. There's still a few things I was kind of tweaking around with, but you can go and check out my kind of thought process there at least.
Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely check that out. I agree with you. I think that this is a really well-positioned deck. I do think that there will, like we said at the top of the pod, there's going to be more people bringing Briar than have been bringing it to the Battlehorn in North America, but I still think that even though it was the same freaking story at the World Championships, Briar is underrated going into this tournament. Really, like if you solve that Oldhim matchup and you think you're a super favorite into Oldhim and you have game against the other decks, I think you're in a great spot. If you go 1 and 2, you're like, I'm favored into Oldhim and I'm favored into Lexi. Even if you go 50 across some of the decks, even have some losing matchups, I think you're in a great spot for this meta. But Ultimate would be the thing first and foremost on my mind. And it does look like, you solve sort of the Ranger problem with some of the tech in this deck. And
to a degree. It's hard, right?
You're still,
the problem is that
you're good.
The problem with playing Briar, I think, is like, let's look at some of the best decks from the past 2 formats. And I'll look at Icelander and Ultimate in particular. They're so consistent. And I think as a player, you can sit there with the confidence of having consistency of playing at your game plans. And yes, you will play. You don't really get too many free wins, but you have consistency. And as a good player, you can feel confident in your ability to grind those matchups out, to find the right lines, to gain the advantage. A deck like Briar, I think it's a lot harder to feel that, especially particularly with like maybe this kind of build. You could sit down against Ultim, and you could feel really favored like I do, and the game might not go your way for consistency reasons, for maybe the game plans just don't quite line up as well. Same with Ranger. I feel into Lexi, I feel favored, but like it's not that much. And Lexi deck is kind of nuts, right? They can just have these crazy 3 of a kind Rain Razor turns. They can just have the right on-hit effects at the right time to really punish you. So it's a kind of semblance of losing a little bit of control. But at the end of the day, I think the deck's good. I think Briar is a good place to be. I don't think it's just the best deck in the format. I think Ultim's the best deck in the format, but I think it's a good meta call.
If you didn't play Briar, what would you play?
Kano.
I feel like it's Lexi. Would you play Lexi? I feel like you would.
No, I would probably play Ultim.
Ultim, okay.
I would play.
Okay.
I would grind trying to learn the mirror as hard as possible, and I think I'd play Ultim.
Dude, I've been saying for weeks, like, there's going to be a lot of people who will go into this tournament. They've heard everybody say that Ultim is the best deck, and, like, there is a big disadvantage to Ultim being the best deck because it's not one you can just pick up and play. It is that you can pick up and play it against most decks in the meta, but when you get to the mirror, it is freaking, it is deep water. And it is a good reason to not play Ultim is when Ultim is the best deck, is because you're going to run into a lot of mirrors. And yeah, I mean, it just takes a lot of work to get to the proficiency that you need to be able to consistently perform in those. Anyway, video version of this podcast on YouTube, if you didn't know, check it out. Link in the description below for the deck list. Twitter, Brendan APG. Fandale, or Fan_Dale, sorry. And don't forget to check out the Arsenal Pass Patreon. We got some deck techs and deck guides up on there if you're looking for some stuff to pick up for the Pro Tour. We did talk about the Zaylia deck. We specifically did a deck with Brody Spurlock, the person who's been terrorizing the Battle Hardens here in the United States, and he did a deck and deck guide with us, and this is a sideboard guide over on Patreon. But that closes out. Next time we speak to you, we're going to be breaking down the Pro Tour, which is really exciting. Hayden, you know what I'm going to close it out with? We had my top 8 prediction. What's yours?
Put me in the spot. You probably got a whole week to sort yours out.
No, I did it in 5 minutes, bro.
I'm going to go less Ultim than you. I think probably what we see is 3 Ultim, 2 Lexi, 2 Lexi. I'm going to put a Briar in there. I mean, I'm backing it. I would have played the deck.
Okay.
I'm going to... I want a Dromai.
Yeah, because the numbers, like if there's like if enough people show up on that deck, you know, it's like you get wrong clock is right twice a day, but this in this chance of once a day. Okay, dash. Yeah, it makes sense. I think that the Ultim, you taking Ultim from 4 down to 3, I think that is totally fair. But I do think that, you know, whether you put Ultim at 3 in the top 8 or 4 in the top 8 is representative of sort of the same belief, which is that deck is the rock of the format and is likely to be the most played deck. You put that together, it's going to be in top 8. I think that I would bet the house that it's going to be in top 8, and I think it'll be there in multiples.
I want to cover my booty a little bit, my butt a little bit. In this lead up to this event, I could see somehow Lexi pivoting to be the number 1 deck and more people playing Lexi than Ultim. I don't think it's going to happen. I think people are going to keep their wits about them and stay steadfast and true. But I think you could see 3 Lexi in top 8, for instance. But I'm gonna say 2.
All right. Well, that concludes episode 106 of Arsenal Pass. See you all next week to break down the Pro Tour results.
See you later.